There's a saying in life, the bigger the risk, the bigger the reward. Do you believe it? Well, in today's episode, I'm going to give you a little bit of a story about my risk and reward journey. Welcome to the Bringing Business to Retail podcast, where I, Selena Knight, share strategies, interview retail revolutionaries, and delve into the minds of e-commerce experts to help you grow a profitable, independent retail or e-commerce business. If you're stuck in a rut, or if you feel like business is way harder than it should be, or you've overachieved all of the things that you've set out to and are wondering what to do next, or how do I even make this better? I know that you're going to love today's episode. If you're stuck in a rut, feel like business is way harder than it should be, or you've achieved all of the things that you set out to and are wondering what next, or how do I even make this better? Then I know that you're going to love today's episode. Hey there, and welcome to today's episode of the Bringing Business to Retail podcast. I'm your host, Selena Knight, the retail strategist, and if it is your first time here, well, today's episode is a little bit different to what I normally do. I hope you're going to enjoy it anyway, and if you are a long-time listener, thank you so much, because without you guys listening and without your feedback, I wouldn't be here doing this today. Okay, so first up, big apologies to my wonderful creative director, Elizabeth. Why? Because back in December, we sat down and mapped out all of January and February podcasts. We looked at the offers that we had, the marketing that we wanted to do, and we created a list of topics for each week for me to talk about. However, as I record this podcast, I'm currently sitting in what we call the games room of our beach house that we generally rent out as an Airbnb, but every now and then we do drop down and spend some time here. A lot of the time we end up doing a little bit of this and a little bit of that, fixing the place up, but it's great just to be away from home, as well as having the sand beneath your feet and the calm and the relaxation that comes from being by the beach. So I did kind of allude to the fact that we do a little bit of work when we come down to the house. We're always fixing it up. I mean, it looks really nice. We renovated it when we bought it and it looks really good, but there are still little bits and pieces that we never quite get around to doing, or it's just maintenance. Every house needs maintenance. So yesterday I was out restaining, revarnishing the back deck, and it's pretty soothing. It's kind of a big mop, and you pop the decking varnish into a big tub, and you just kind of slowly go backwards and forwards very gently, making sure there's not too many streaks. It's kind of soothing in the sense that sure, you're working, but it's not hard, and there's kind of some comfort in the fact that you're looking at the work that you're doing and you are just making sure there's no streaks in it or no bubbles, all those sorts of things. So there's this attention to detail, but without a lot of mental stress, a lot of mental load. And as I was doing this mopping back and forth, I was thinking about the risks that I've taken in my life. And this house, buying this house was a big risk for Ed and I. And then it made me think about reward. And I sort of just thought about this. It took me about half an hour to do the whole deck. And as I was just thinking about the risks I've taken in my life and how some have paid off and some haven't, and I'm going to talk to you about those in a minute. And I just decided that this was a story that I thought I would like to tell. I know normally I'm all about strategy and ways to fix things, but sometimes I feel like stories are just the best way of getting the message across, right? So if you want to come along with me for the journey today and hear about my risk and reward strategies, I guess are going to be in there, I would love to have you. But if you are the kind of person who just wants how-tos, I'm going to try and put those in there, but there's going to be some story along the line as well. All right, so as I mentioned, we are at the beach house, which is down in the south coast of New South Wales. Very lucky to even be here because we were in lockdown over Christmas. So when the lockdown finished, we luckily had actually booked ourselves into the house, because the house is booked right the way through until kind of March, April this year. And then we've already had bookings for Christmas Christmas in January 2022, which sounds fantastic, right? And it is. I am so grateful, because if we don't rent this house out, then we don't have the income to pay the mortgage. And that was the big risk we took when we bought this house. We had to sit down like any property and evaluate, would we make enough income to pay for the mortgage and the upkeep, or would we have to put some of our own income in? And if we, worst case scenario, if we had no bookings, could we afford to keep it? And so, everybody does this when they buy a house, whether it's a house to live in or whether it's an investment property. And as people who have done this before, we have bought and sold investment properties in the past, we've bought and held investment properties in the past, we had a pretty good idea of what the risk was and what the reward could be. Now, the risk for this house was that we actually bought it at auction, which doesn't generally happen in this area. And the reason for that was because it was a bank-owned property. Now, I know if you're listening in America, you're like, that's like a done thing. It doesn't happen a lot here in Australia. So we were very unsure about the process, and there are a lot of things we had to understand the risk before we came into it. So we actually paid for because the property had a bit of damage to it, and on the surface, the damage was kind of like those flip and flop shows that you see on TV. It wasn't unlivable, but there was a lot of damage on the surface, which I know put a lot of people off, and that was where we took the risk. We figured a lot of people wouldn't be prepared to take on a renovation project like this, but as seasoned renovators and seasoned investors, we knew that we could do it. And so we mapped out what it would cost to renovate the property, and then we paid our own independent builder to come in and look at the damage and tell us if it was as bad as other people thought, or we had a sneaking suspicion that it was just cosmetic. And it turned out that's exactly what it was. So we were going to have to rip out, the majority of the stuff that had to be done was in the bathroom and the kitchen. Now we were going to have to rip those out anyway. They were so dated, the floors were lifting, the tiles were lifting. So we'd already worked that into our budget. So for us, the risk was more along the lines of being able to cover the mortgage and the upkeep rather than the initial investment. Now, I'm sure that you've all seen those shows on TV, the home renovation shows where they buy the house and sometimes they don't make any money on it. Now, we never bought this house to flip it. We bought this house specifically as an investment because we knew that it was near the beach, it was a very big holiday maker area, and we thought in the future we could spend some time there ourselves, but also in the future, in the not near future, we would love to trade this house up for somewhere on the beachfront. So at the moment, we're just a few minutes drive from the beach, so we're not right on the beach, but we would love to have one of those gorgeous houses on the beach. And it's always about just, they say, get your foot into the market, put your foot in the market, get your foot in the market, whatever they say about feet in the market. But you've got to kind of be in it to win it. So that's exactly what we did. And when it comes to risk, we have had our fair share of blows, I guess you could say. The first agent that we hired to manage the property, because we weren't local to the area, it's about sort of 3.5, 4 hours from home. The first agent, it turned out, was embezzling our money. I know, shocking, right? We had our own Airbnb listing, and this is the other thing that this is not going to be all about Airbnb, I promise, but a large portion of it is because it's where a lot of my risk recently has been involved. But one of the key things I say in business, it doesn't matter if it's your Airbnb, it doesn't matter if it's your retail business, it doesn't matter if it's your shares or wherever it is you're investing, you should always have control. We've talked about this about websites before, where you hire someone to put your website together, but you don't actually own the website. You haven't got admin rights to the website. Or we see this with hosting. In fact, one of our clients just recently, we built a website for them, and the person who was current at the time held their website hostage and wouldn't transfer their ownership until they paid an extra fee. So as I said, it doesn't matter what your asset is. It doesn't matter if it's a digital asset or if it's a physical asset, but you should always be in control. And I guess as the kind of the inner marketer in me, I wanted to be able to market my house because I had the vision for what I wanted it to be. I knew the exact person we wanted to stay here. We've done it specifically in mind for families. That's why we have the games room. I knew the language. I knew the kinds of things they would come to this area for. So I wrote all the copy for the property. I I edited the photos. They had a photographer come in. I edited the photos. And when we handed it over to this agent, we thought that would be easiest way to manage, because they would take care of whether there was cleaning issues, because obviously you have to have a cleaner when you're a remote host. They would take care of any maintenance, and sure, it did cost money. But for us, we thought that there was some safety in there. However, and this is where you should always be in control of your money pillar, guys. It's a business like this. This house is a business just like your retail business. We were going through the figures one day and we realized in our Airbnb report, there was a very big discrepancy to the report the agent had given us. And Ed was talking to me about it, and we were putting the numbers into our accounting software. And he said, there's money missing on every single one of these invoices. He said, I can't add it up. And I said, well, maybe it's the commission that Airbnb take. And he said, no. I've worked that out. There's still between $50 and $100 on every single booking is missing. And so I quizzed them on it. And their answer was, you're the only owners that we have that have their own Airbnb listing. Not, we'll look into it, not, here's what it is. Their answer was basically a statement back to us that we were the only people who had ever discovered this discrepancy. And so they were taking somewhere between $50 and $100 on every single booking that we had, but not reporting it. So let's say, for example, Airbnb said we should have received $500. What they were reporting to us is that Airbnb gave them $450. So it was legitimately, well, not illegitimate, it was very illegitimate. It was just embezzlement. Basically, they took this money, and when it was quizzed, they sort of said it was another fee that they had never disclosed. But anyway, there were lots of other things as well, but that was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back that said, these people are not here to help us grow. It turns out our next door neighbour also hired that agent and had over $4,000 of their rental income disappear. So they were definitely doing it to everybody. But you need to be in control of your money pillar. So you have to know where your money is coming in and going out in business. It doesn't matter if you think you're not good at numbers. It doesn't matter if you have an accountant or a bookkeeper. I've told that story before. You need to know where the money coming in is, how it moves around your business, and where it goes back out. So back to risk and reward. Last year, the last 12 months have been very risky for us. We had the bushfires that came through in the summertime. So summer is our peak period. We can just about cover a year's worth of mortgage in the current economic climate if we rent out the property over the summer break. So when we lost all of our bookings because of the bushfires, that was a lot of money that we had to find. And it didn't get any better because the next busiest time for us is the Easter break. And that is in March/April. And what happened in March/April? COVID hit. And we all went into lockdown. No one could leave the area. So all the people who come here are the people from Sydney, just like us. So we lost around 6 months worth of income. That is a huge risk to take, especially when you don't know. For me personally, I wasn't sure what would happen in my business. I wasn't sure if I would actually be able to continue because lots of people in retail were struggling. Turned out it was actually a really great time for us, and we expanded our services, we expanded our agency, and we did okay. But I didn't know that, right? It's risk and reward. And now we have the opposite, right? Now the reward part is coming because of COVID. No one wants to go anywhere and no one can go anywhere. So now the house is booked out right the way through till Easter. And as I said, we're already having bookings for Christmas and January next year. I have taken a lot of risks in my life, and some of them have paid off and some of them haven't. Now, one of the biggest business risks in terms of my retail business was when I made the decision to sell, at the time, my investment property to grow my business. And if you've been around for a while, you'll know the story that I specifically remember it was a Saturday. It was a very beautiful Saturday morning when I walked into the store. I always used to get there early so I could do stuff because I was a workaholic, really. I would get in early, and I remember this day I put the key in the lock and I turned the door, and as I walked into the little hallway and I turned into the store, I just had this like crushing overwhelm as I looked around, and I just thought, oh my goodness, if I sold everything in this store today, which never happens, right? By the time I paid all of my bills and paid all my staff and all my overheads, all my expenses, all my outgoings, I'd only have a few $1,000s to take away. And for me, that was crushing, because here I was working so many days a week, sometimes 7 days a week, getting to the store hours early, leaving hours late, all so I could grow this business. And I knew that if I was going to have the empire that I wanted, and that's what I used to call it, my retail empire, something had to change. At the time I didn't know it, but looking back, that was that pivotal moment when everything in my business changed. It's where I discovered what I now call the 5 pillars of retail success. It's where I discovered that you need the focus if you want to grow the business. It's where I discovered that systems are so important to help your team, to help you so much. At the time, you don't know it, but looking back, it was kind of when I pulled up my big girl pants and went, crap, I am a real business owner. And if I want this business to thrive, I have to thrive. And thriving is not leaving my husband and my daughter before breakfast so I can go and work more. That is not thriving. And that is when I made the decision. I remember saying, lots of things happened on that day, but I do remember calling up Ed later on that day after I've had a bit of cry and saying, I want to sell my investment property. So it was the property that I had owned before I met Ed. So it was my investment property. But that was my superannuation. That was my retirement. And I didn't really have any plans to sell it. But I also knew that you have to spend money to make money. And I see this so often with my clients, is they go through this period of growth in their business and they're making lots of money. But what happens is they don't have any cash. Their cash flow runs short. And think about it, that is so easy to happen, because if you go from $30,000 turnover a month to $60,000 turnover a month, you have to have more inventory. So every single bit of cash flow that you've got is going back into the business to fuel the inventory, to make the money. And so quite often we see this when because I work with growth strategies, we see that retailers and e-commerce store owners hit this point where they are doing really well, but they have no money. And they can get caught short there. If you don't have an asset to tap into, if you don't have an overdraft or an extra line of credit or some way of funding the growth in your business, then you can have a successful business that doesn't have any money and can go pear-shaped. And it happens more often than you think. And it is not because somebody has done something untoward. It's not because they haven't managed their money. It's not because they haven't looked after the business. Sometimes rapid growth just is too rapid. And that's awesome from the outside, but from the inside it can be really, really stressful. So I knew that if I wanted the growth that I had envisioned for my business, it was going to take some money to do that. So I made the decision to invest in my investment property and do some renovations and then go ahead and sell it. And I took that money, it was actually a record for the street. So took that money and invested that in myself. I invested it in my business and I bought myself a new car. So I took a big risk there because that was my retirement fund. But I also got a huge reward. I made more money than I thought, and I was able to do more with that money. So big risk, big reward. But like I said, I kind of alluded this at the beginning, it's not all rainbows and unicorns. I have made business decisions that have not made me money. I am not the person to come to if you want to buy shares. Every single group of shares that I have ever bought has ended up in liquidation. I am lucky enough to have a next door neighbour who once upon a time was a futures trader. I leave the share trading up to him. He's done really well. I like to invest in property. That's the thing that I feel comfortable with. It's the thing that I feel like I understand and I enjoy. And look, and I am always looking for new ways to diversify my income. But I do tend to like my property. However, it's a very expensive game, very expensive hobby / game / investment to have. So shares, I've done the risk, I haven't done the reward. Haven't gotten the reward at the end. And my property buying hasn't always worked out either. So many years ago, in fact, it was probably about 15 or 16 years ago now, I bought a house in a little country town. It is a beautiful country town here in Australia called Cowra. It is known for the Japanese breakout. So there was a prisoner of war camp. Sounds really gruesome, right? There was a prisoner of war camp there, but it was probably the most laid back prisoner of war camp because the POWs were actually allowed to go out and farm and be part of the community. However, the Japanese, because of their culture, struggled with having been captured. So long story, you can go and read about it. There was a great big breakout and a lot of Japanese people died, many of them by their own hand because they didn't want to be captured. So kind of a sad story, but it is a beautiful town and there are beautiful other things that go with it. So I had thought that I would be getting in early because I did my research, and because it is a country town, there's not an awful lot of jobs, right? So the economic climate isn't always fantastic. However, I did my research and the government was going to build these post-production movie studios to try and encourage people to relocate to country towns. So I thought, yay, I'm going to get in on the ground level. And I bought this little 1920s cottage. And in fact, I was so impressed with the town. It's a beautiful town. That Ed and I actually bought another piece of land and built another house on it, which we sold a couple of years ago. Now, the problem with the property that I bought is it's a 1920s property. So it's got its little quirks and foibles anyway, but it's been rented out all this time. And it turns out that the agent, once again, I feel like I don't have an awful lot of luck with agents. The agent had let the tenant who'd been there for years run it into the ground. And I was getting quite stressed about this, and I'd had a lot of fights, like literally fights with the agent about the way the property was being managed. I didn't believe that they were managing it correctly. But being a remote owner, it's quite difficult to know exactly what's going on. So anyway, we agreed to part ways and I was really stressed. This happened just like the week before Christmas and I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do. Ed and I were super busy trying to finish the work we're doing at home, plus trying to wrap up I was trying to wrap up some of our agency clients' projects that we were working on. So I just didn't have the ability to drive 5 hours each way to this country town to look at the property. And I asked another agent to go and have a look, and she called me and she said, we can't manage that property. It's been run down so bad. Like, do you know how bad it is? And I said, no. And she said, you really need to come and have a look because it's really bad. And so a couple of days before Christmas, I'm super stressed about this. I don't know what to do. And then we went back into lockdown, so I couldn't even leave my house. And over Christmas, Ed and I decided that we would sell the house. Now, there's a problem with that. One, it's clearly going to need a lot of work to get it up to a standard where someone's going to want to buy it. But two, it is currently worth, 15 years later, the exact amount we paid for it. So if we sell it, we're not going to make any money, or I'm not going to make any money. And let's be honest, the current days on the market in a country town, well, this country town, is 160. So we're looking at 6 or 7 months of the property being empty before somebody buys it. So this, again, fueled my stress. What am I going to do? The first step of that was booking in a week off over the Easter break and knowing that we're going to have to go down there and we're going to have to paint and do the work because risk and reward, I can't invest too much money in the property because I'm already not going to make any money. So there's going to have to be a bit of sweat equity going in so that I can see some kind of remuneration, if any. So then came the stress of having to send the termination notice to the tenant. But in through all of this, just recently I was scrolling through Facebook and I saw a new website, a new booking platform. It's called Rip a Ride. I think that's how you pronounce it. And it is all about getting people to go on country adventures, regional adventures. And so there are these beautiful houses in tiny remote country towns. It's a cross between Airbnb and Insta stories. Guys, it is gorgeous, even if you're not in Australia. I highly recommend you have a look at it because they have marketed the bejesus out of these properties. It is not just like Airbnb where here's a picture of the house and here's what I've got. You have to tell a story about your house. And the story also has to include what's going on in the local area, whether that's walking or kayaking or culture and history, all those sorts of things. And I just thought, oh my gosh, this could be the answer. Now, I will preface this with, I did look at Airbnb-ing the property before deciding to sell it, but it's not a very big country town. And there are 7 motor inns, so very low class accommodation. There is nothing, what I like to call, there is nothing nice, are currently available to Airbnb. In fact, there are no house style Airbnbs. So 2 things happen there. You've got 2 decisions to make. One is, are there none because there is no market? Or are there none and it's a missed opportunity? And this is something you have to come up with yourself in business. Is it because the market's not there to sustain your idea? Or is it because nobody's yet thought of it? Now, I don't know the answer to that yet. Here is the next risk I'm going to take, which is at Easter time, Ed and I will be packing up Lana and the dogs and heading down to Cowra for a week or so to renovate the property and to furnish it. So now I've got to, over the next couple of months, I have to find myself some really quaint and quirky furniture to furnish this house because here's the thing, it's got to be different. The people who use these booking sites aren't looking for the posh house. They want a little bit of luxury, but more than anything, they want an adventure. And for me, what I love about this is it's a whole new play on my marketing skills. I have to market the bejesus out of this house to a group of hipsters because that's their target market. Honestly, as I said, it's like Insta stories across Airbnb, and it is all about the hipsters. So I have to investigate my market. I have to research my ideal demographic. I have to find who that ultimate customer is who's prepared to pay more than a motel accommodation rate because they want the history that comes with the story that I can provide for my house. I know, it's a big risk. I don't know if it's going to work. I don't know if it's going to pay off. But here's the thing about risk and reward. You are taking a risk right now. Starting your business or growing your business or investing in yourself, investing in your team, buying more inventory, marketing your business, all of that is risk. But for the most part, risk that you're taking is probably calculated. Now, here's what I've discovered about risk. It's generally when you take a risk, you've got a desired reward. You have an outcome that you want to achieve. And if it does better than that, that's awesome. And if it does worse than that, you're going to be really disappointed. But you're prepared to end up with any of those scenarios. But what you really want is the bigger risk, bigger reward, right? But you'd be happy with the middle of the range expectation, your baseline. Now, your baseline could be just breaking even. Maybe your baseline is much higher than that. And I'm really lucky I've had to sit down and for my house in Cowra, I'm really quite lucky with the interest rates that are what they are right now. My risk is, yes, I will lose the regular income that a tenant would afford, but the reward is I can earn a lot more if I market the property well. But I have to make that decision that maybe nobody will come to this town. Maybe my story isn't good enough. Maybe this platform isn't big enough. That's the risk I have to take. But like I said, when you take a risk, you always have this desired reward. Maybe you don't say it to anybody. Maybe it's just in your brain, but you have it. And it's that measure of what you're going to call success. And here's the thing I've discovered about success. One is it never looks like what you think it's going to look like. You can look back and see success in so many places that you never thought of at the time. Because as entrepreneurs, we are always looking at the next best thing. But I also know about success from experience that you get it easier, I guess is the word, when you have set yourself up for success. Like the research we were talking about knowing what those risks are, about understanding what the rewards might be, about knowing what your investment is going to cost, about looking at your future growth and seeing if you can sustain it. Like I talked about earlier, that business conundrum that people end up with when they have really quick growth is really quick growth without cash. So if you're taking a big risk to invest in your business and you get to the point you wanted to get to, can you sustain that? What is that going to look like? And what is it that you actually want? Because success doesn't always come in the shape and form that you think it's going to. And you have to know what you want if you want to be successful. Because otherwise you might get there and you might have no idea that you're there. Does that make sense? Look at it like this. Let's just say lots of people struggle to lose weight. I'm one of those people. And when I lost 15 kilos, so what's that about? 35 pounds. I always kept thinking, oh my goodness, you've just got a few more to go. But then you put on a couple of pounds and you think, oh my God, now I've got to lose those all over again. But the success was not for me in losing the 15 kilos. It was losing the extra couple of kilos. But then, of course, when it goes backwards, you don't realize it was successful in the first place. I hope that is making sense. So success is about knowing what you want and then breaking that down so that you can achieve that exponential growth. Having those milestones in place so that when you hit them, you know what your next step is going to be. And maybe if we're talking about retail business and e-commerce business, maybe that is when I hit this point, I know that I'm going to need an extra team member. Or if I hit this number, this is what my organizational hierarchy is going to look like. When I get to a certain point, I only want to be doing social media and PR, or I only want to be doing R&D, or I only want to be doing marketing and development. I don't want to do all those other things. Because if you don't know what that looks like for you, what the reward is, then taking the risk, you have to ask yourself, is it worth it? Totally up to you, I guess. Now, just while I was saying that, it made me think about the fact that we do actually have a workbook called Setting Yourself Up for Success. And I'm going to talk to Elizabeth and we're going to, as I said, this was a very unscheduled episode. So what I'm going to do, we sell those workbooks on the retailacademy.net website. We sell them for, I think it's $79. I am going to get Elizabeth to change that out and I'm going to let you guys grab that. If you want to, I promise you there's no Airbnb talk inside of that workbook, but what it will do is it will help you work out what you want and it will help you work backwards to put the systems and the processes and the milestones and whatever it is that you need in place to achieve exponential growth. And guys, I have seen this happen. I have seen people going from $100,000 to $1 million in 12 months when they do this right. When they take what I teach, which is the 5 core pillars of retail success, and they put it together with my 90-day plan, but they do this as well. They set themselves up for success. So if you head over to the retailacademy.net website and you look at the inside the shop, there is a workbook called Setting Yourself Up for Success. It normally retails for $79. I'm going to get Elizabeth to drop that down to $29. Let's say through till the end of January. Through till the 31st of January, I'm going to drop that price down to $29 so that you can do this. So you can start 2021 off with this clear path on knowing how you're going to achieve that reward that you really want. How you're going to set yourself up to build the business that will give you what it is that you want in your life. Now, I don't have the URL with me because that was a very off the top of my head decision, but if you head over to theretaileracademy.net, go into the shop, find the Setting Yourself Up for Success workbook, I will get Elizabeth to swap that over to $29 for the rest of January. Okay, so thanks for bearing with me on today's episode, which was very different to usual. I was letting you into a lot of my behind the scenes money journeys, both the highs and the lows, and I promise that I will keep you up to date with what happens with our pretty little Cowra house. And once it goes live, I'll even pop a link up to the house so that you can see it. If you also want to check out that website I talked about called Ripperide, I think it is RIPARIDE, Instagram stories crossed with Airbnb. I'm absolutely loving it. Even though I'm not an interior stylist, I have been Pinteresting the bejesus out of everything. I'll be hitting Elizabeth up for some design advice because in one of her many iterations, she was an interior designer. And when I have those photos, I'll make sure I pop them up on Instagram. But for now, I'm going to say, welcome to 2021, guys. May this be your year of success. And grab that workbook if you need some help to define and set yourself up for success. I'll talk to you next week. Bye. I hope you enjoyed this week's episode of the Bringing Business to Retail podcast. You can find all of the show notes over at selinaknight.com. If you found something that you heard today particularly useful, I'd love it if you could leave me a review on iTunes or Stitcher. And of course, feel free to share this episode with someone that you think could benefit by listening to it. Want more retail biz strategies? You can watch the Bringing Business to Retail TV show, where each week I'll answer a question or provide you with a simple, actionable retail biz strategy that you can implement in your business right away. If you have a question or a guest, I'd love to hear from you. Drop my team an email at podcast@selinaknight.com, and I'll see you on the next episode. Have a great week.